I want you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I'm not a hero. I've never been a hero. Heroes don't spend 11 years learning how to dismantle human beings in efficient sequence. Heroes don't carry the kind of quiet that follows you home from Fallujah, from Kandahar, from rooms you'll never speak about at dinner parties. I'm a man who spent 3 decades preparing for the worst version of the world. And when that version finally arrived, I happened to be standing in the right building. My name is Thomas Cray, retired Master Sergeant, United States Army, 57 years old, bad left knee from a rooftop jump in Mosul, tinnitus that sings me to sleep every night like a frequency only ghosts can tune. I was sitting in the orthopedic wing of Meridian General Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, waiting for an MRI on that knee, when the television in the waiting room changed my life and the lives of 300 strangers who didn't know my name yet. The anchor's face was wrong. That was the first thing I noticed. Not her words, her face. She had the kind of practiced composure that network training drills into you. But underneath it, something was collapsing. Her eyes kept darting left, off camera, like someone behind the glass was feeding her information she didn't want to repeat. The chyron read, CDC issues emergency advisory, unknown pathogen, multiple cities. The footage behind her showed Atlanta. People running through a parking structure. A man on the ground convulsing so violently his shoes came off. I stood up. The woman beside me. Later I'd learn her name was Gloria Hutchins, 61, retired school principal from Shelbyville. She looked at me and said, "Lord, what is happening down there?" I didn't answer her. I was counting exits. I was measuring the windows. I was calculating the square footage of the floor I was standing on, and estimating how many people were in the building based onto the parking lot I'd walked through 20 minutes earlier. That parking lot had been full. I walked to the nurse's station. A young man in green scrubs, maybe 25, was filling out something on a tablet. His badge said Dayon. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me. I need to speak with whoever runs this building, right now. He blinked. Sir, if you're having a medical concern, look at the television behind you. Dayon turned. The footage had shifted to Dallas, a highway overpass, cars piled in angles that only panic creates, figures moving between them that weren't moving right. Their gait was fractured too fast and too loose, like marionettes cut from half their strings. Dayon's lips parted, but nothing came out. Who runs this hospital? I asked again. Dr. Elizabeth. She's the chief administrator. 3rd floor. I didn't wait for the elevator. The stairwell smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air. My niece screamed on every step. I passed a custodian on the 2nd floor landing who gave me a curious look but didn't stop me. The 3rd floor was administrative carpet instead of tile, quieter, insulated from the reality downstairs. I found a frosted glass door with a brass nameplate. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, Chief Administrator. I knocked once and opened it before anyone answered. She was on the phone. Mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, silver-streaked hair pulled tight. Her expression when she saw me was one I recognized, not fear, not anger, but the specific alertness of someone who manages emergencies for a living and knows when one has walked through her door. She put the phone down. Who are you? Thomas Cray, retired military. I was a patient downstairs until about 2 minutes ago. Mr. Cray, this is a private... You've seen the news. She paused. Her eyes dropped to the phone she'd just set down. You're getting calls, I continued, from the health department, from whoever coordinates emergency protocols in this region. And whatever they're telling you, It's already behind the reality on the ground. Dr. Elizabeth removed her glasses from her forehead and placed them on the desk slowly, like a woman setting down something she might not pick up again. "Sit down, Mr. Cray." "I'd rather stand. We don't have time for sitting." She studied me the way commanding officers studied terrain, not with trust, but with calculation. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell had managed Meridian General through 2 flood emergencies, a chemical spill evacuation, and a tuberculosis quarantine scare. She told me this not to impress me, but to establish that she didn't hand her building over to strangers who barged through her office door. "I have protocols for this," she said. "Your protocols assume external support. Fire, National Guard, FEMA staging areas." I pointed at her phone. "Call them. See who answers." She picked up the phone and dialed. I watched her press it to her ear, watched the seconds stretch out. Watched the faint sound of ringing repeat 7, 8, 9 times. No answer. She hung up and tried another number. Same result. A third, this one connected. I could hear the voice on the other end, clipped and breathless, before Anand put it on speaker. "Overwhelmed. We're directing all available personnel to the convention center downtown. Do not send patients here. Repeat. Do not transport patients to Norton or Baptist East. Both facilities are..." The line cut. Static hummed. Dr. Elizabeth looked at me. "How long do you think we have?" she asked. Not how bad is it? Not what do we do? How long? That question told me everything I needed to know about Priya Anand. She was already past denial. She was in the arithmetic phase, measuring resources against time. Depends on how fast it's moving. Based on what I saw on the news, the way those highways looked, the density of the footage, this thing is spreading through contact. Not airborne, or we'd already be finished. That means it's moving at the speed of people. Panicked people. People in cars trying to leave cities. Louisville is a city. Yes, it is. She stood. "What do you need?" Those 3 words mattered more than anything else she could have said. Not "what do you suggest?" Not "I'll take it from here." What do you need? Priya Anand, in that moment, did something most leaders fail to do. She recognized that the situation had exceeded the boundaries of her expertise, and that the man standing in front of her existed precisely for this kind of moment. I need a full count of everyone in this building. Staff, patients, visitors, every person. I need the maintenance supervisor. I need the facility's blueprint. And I need you to lock the main entrance in 15 minutes. 15. Anyone who's coming in from outside needs to get in within 15 minutes. After that, we seal the building. That's Mr. Cray. We're a hospital. We can't just... Doctor, everything outside this building is about to become something your emergency protocols never imagined. Every minute those doors stay open past the window is a minute we risk letting in someone who's already infected. She didn't argue further. She picked up the desk phone and paged the head of nursing, a woman named Loretta Vance. Then she called down to maintenance and asked for someone named Carl. Then she pulled a binder from her shelf, actual paper, actual ink, and flipped to a section labeled Emergency Lockdown Procedures. "We've never used this section," she said. "Today's the day." I left her office and went back to the stairwell. My knee had settled into a low, burning ache that I pushed into the back of my mind the way I'd pushed 100 injuries before it. Pain is a signal, not a command. You acknowledge it and move on. The first floor was already different. The ambient noise had shifted. When I'd walked through 20 minutes ago, the hospital had the usual rhythm, murmured conversations, shoe squeaks on tile, the distant beep of monitors. Now there was a density to the sound. Voices overlapping. The television volume had been turned up, and a small crowd had gathered around it. 12, maybe 15 people standing in a cluster, watching the screen with a particular stillness of people who are beginning to understand that the world outside has changed while they were inside filling out insurance forms. I saw Gloria Hutchins in the group. She caught my eye. Her face held a question she was afraid to ask out loud. I walked past her toward the main entrance. The automatic glass doors parted, and warm Kentucky air hit my face, carrying the faint smell of exhaust and cut grass. The parking lot was still. Normal. A woman was walking toward the entrance carrying flowers. Beyond her, maybe half a mile south, I could see smoke rising from 2 separate points on the horizon. The woman with the flowers was named Denise Okoye. She was 34, visiting her mother in the cardiac unit. And the bouquet she carried was pink peonies wrapped in green tissue paper. She would become one of the most important people inside the building within 48 hours. But right then, she was just a daughter with flowers, walking toward automatic doors, unaware that the smoke columns behind her were the first visible evidence that Louisville's infrastructure was beginning to fracture. I held the door for her. She said thank you. I watched her walk inside. Then I stepped out into the parking lot and looked south. The smoke was dark, not the gray of a structure fire, but the oily black of vehicles burning. Multiple vehicles. I could hear something too, distant and difficult to place. Not sirens, something irregular, staccato, like a crowd at a stadium heard from miles away, except stadiums have rhythm and this had none. I went back inside. Dayon was still at the nurse's station, but now he was standing, phone pressed to his ear, face pulled tight with confusion. "Dayon," I said, "where's the maintenance office?" "Basement level. Take the service elevator past radiology." He paused. "Sir, my cousin just called me from Okolona. He says people are attacking each other in the Walmart parking lot. Biting." He said biting. "Get away from the front of the building. Stay near the interior corridors." "Is this real?" "It's real. And I need you functional. So put the phone away and focus on what's in front of you." He stared at me for 3 seconds, then nodded. Something in my voice must have triggered a response he couldn't articulate, not obedience, but the instinct to follow someone who seems to know the shape of the crisis. I'd seen it 100 times in soldiers who were green. The ones who survived were the ones who locked in fast. The basement was cold and hummed with mechanical life. I found the maintenance supervisor in a cluttered office, surrounded by pipe schematics and work orders. Carl Toomey, 63, Vietnam-era Navy veteran, though he hadn't served in combat. Thick arms, thick glasses, a Louisville Cardinals cap that looked like it had been through a decade of sweat. "You Cray?" he asked. Anand had already called. "I am. I need the full building layout. Every entrance, every loading dock, every window on the ground floor. Anything that opens to the outside." Carl pulled a rolled blueprint from a shelf and spread it across his desk, pinning the corners with a coffee mug and a stapler. Meridian General was a mid-sized facility. 4 stories. 2 wings east for surgical and west for general care. A central atrium on the first floor. The emergency department had its own entrance on the north side. Loading dock on the south, used for supplies and kitchen deliveries. There were 62 ground floor windows, 14 exterior doors, including fire exits, and 2 underground parking access points. "These underground entrances," I said, tapping the blueprint, "do they have gates?" "Rolling steel, motorized. I can drop them from the control panel down the hall." Do it now, both of them. Carl looked at me over his glasses. You military? 30 years. My old man was in Korea. Then you understand what I'm about to ask you. I need every exterior door that isn't the main entrance secured in the next 10 minutes. Chained, bolted, barricaded, whatever you have. Fire exits, get the crash bars disabled. I know that violates code. I don't care about code right now. Carl didn't argue. He picked up a radio, called 2 of his maintenance staff, and started issuing instructions with the clipped efficiency of a man who'd been waiting his whole life for someone to tell him the rules had changed. I took the blueprint with me. Back on the first floor, the crowd around the television had grown. 30 people now. The footage showed downtown Louisville, not Atlanta, not Dallas, Louisville or Louisville. The camera was shaky, filmed from an upper floor of a building looking down at an intersection near 4th Street. Figures were running. Other figures were chasing them. The ones chasing moved with that same broken puppet gait I'd seen on the earlier footage, fast, disjointed, relentless. A woman in the crowd made a sound that wasn't a scream, but something worse. A low, involuntary moan of recognition. She knew that intersection. Everyone in that room knew that intersection. Dr. Elizabeth's voice came over the hospital intercom at 2:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I'd started tracking everything by the clock. Minutes mattered in a way they hadn't since my last deployment. Her voice was calm. Deliberately calm. The kind of measured tone that experienced leaders use when they know that the delivery of information is as important as the information itself. Attention all staff, patients, and visitors. This is Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. Due to an evolving public health emergency, Meridian General Hospital is implementing a temporary security lockdown. All exterior doors will be secured. Please remain in your current area. Staff, please report to your department supervisors for further instructions. This is a precautionary measure. We are safe. We are prepared. Updates will follow. The intercom clicked off. I was standing at the main entrance, watching the last handful of people come through. A young couple, Marcus and Shonda Williams, late 20s, both still wearing visitor badges from the maternity ward. A maintenance worker returning from a smoke break. An elderly man in a wheelchair being pushed by a hospital orderly. And then, at the edge of the parking lot, actually running a man in a business suit with a briefcase clutched against his chest and blood on his shirt collar. He was 40 yards out when I saw the figures behind him. 3 of them. Moving fast across the asphalt in that uncoordinated sprint that I now recognized as the signature locomotion of the infected. Their mouths were open. No sound carried across the distance, but the visual was enough. Jaws working, arms reaching, bodies propelled by something that had replaced volition with hunger. The man in the suit saw the hospital doors. He screamed, one word, over and over. Please. I held the door. He crossed the threshold and collapsed on the tile, gasping, briefcase clattering. The 3 infected were 30 yards out. 20. I could see their faces now, not monsters, not demons. People. A woman in nurse's scrubs, with an ID badge still clipped to her chest. A teenager in a fast food uniform. A man in paint-stained work clothes. Their eyes were wrong, dilated past any normal human state, pupils consuming the iris. And their skin had a vascular quality, like every vessel beneath the surface had risen to the top. 15 yards. I hit the lockdown switch Carl had wired to the main entrance 10 minutes earlier. The automatic doors stopped their motion mid-cycle and froze. The manual deadbolts, industrial grade, installed during a renovation 3 years ago, engaged with a heavy thunk I felt through my shoes. The reinforced glass held as the first infected body slammed against it. The impact was hard enough to spider crack the outer pane. The woman in scrubs pressed her face against the glass, and I could see her teeth working against it, leaving wet streaks. Behind her, the teenager hit the adjacent panel. The man in work clothes circled toward the side windows. I stepped back. The glass held, double-paned, safety-rated, designed to withstand severe weather impacts. It would hold for now. The man in the suit, his name was Arthur Penn, I'd learn later. A financial advisor from the East End, was still on the floor, hyperventilating. Blood on his collar, but I checked him immediately. No wounds, no bites. The blood wasn't his. "Whose blood is this?" I asked, kneeling. "My secretary. She in the office, she just started shaking, and then she..." He couldn't finish. "Did she bite you? Scratch you? Any broken skin?" No, I ran. I just ran." I pulled him to his feet and moved him away from the doors. The infected outside continued to hit the glass in irregular intervals, like a heartbeat that couldn't find its rhythm. Loretta Vance appeared. Head of nursing, 50, compact, with the bearing of someone who had managed hospital floors through every kind of human catastrophe. She looked at the figures outside the glass, looked at me, and said nothing for exactly 4 seconds. "I need a head count," she said. "Every floor." "That's exactly what I was going to ask you for." She turned and walked toward the east wing, already pulling a clipboard from somewhere. Loretta Vance was a woman who responded to the apocalypse by organizing it. I was beginning to build my team. The head count took 41 minutes. Loretta coordinated floor by floor, department by department, using the nursing supervisors from each unit as her census takers. When the numbers came back, I wrote them on the whiteboard in the first floor conference room that Dr. Elizabeth had designated as our command center. Staff, 94, including doctors, nurses, technicians, administrative personnel, maintenance, kitchen workers, and janitorial. Patients, 127, spread across surgical recovery, general care, cardiac, maternity, pediatric, and the orthopedic wing where I'd been sitting an hour ago. Visitors, 79. Family members, friends, delivery personnel, and a group of 8 medical students who'd been shadowing in the ER total, 300. 300 people sealed inside a building designed to hold roughly that many under normal operational conditions, except nothing about these conditions was normal. And the building was now a fortress, whether anyone liked it or not. I stood at the whiteboard and looked at the faces gathered in the conference room. Dr. Elizabeth sat at the head of the table. Loretta Vance stood by the door. Carl Toomey leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Dayon sat in a chair near the corner, vibrating with restless energy. Arthur Penn had been given a clean shirt and a sedative and was somewhere in the east wing. The faces around this table were the ones who would determine whether 300 people lived or died. "Here's where we are," I said. "The hospital is sealed. Carl's team has secured every exterior door, the underground parking gates are down, and the main entrance is holding. The ground floor windows are our vulnerability. They're reinforced, but not impenetrable. If a large enough group of infected hits the same point repeatedly, they'll eventually breach." "How do you know that?" asked Dr. Rashid Malik, a cardiologist who'd been rounding when the lockdown was announced. Mid-40s, lean, precise. His question wasn't hostile, it was diagnostic. He wanted to understand the methodology. "Because I've seen what persistent force does to every structure human beings have ever built. Nothing holds forever. The question is whether we can make it hold long enough." "Long enough for what?" Loretta asked. I let the question hang. It was the question. Long enough for what? Rescue? Military intervention? The restoration of order? I didn't have an answer. and lying would have cost me the credibility I needed. Long enough to figure out what comes next, I said. Right now we work with what we have. Dr. Elizabeth, what's our supply situation? She opened a folder. Kitchen stores are restocked every Tuesday and Friday. Today is Wednesday. We have enough food in the kitchen and pantry stores for roughly 3 days at normal cafeteria service levels. If we ration, we can stretch that to 6, maybe 7. Water? Municipal water is still flowing. If that stops, we have emergency reserves and rooftop tanks standard for a hospital this size. Approximately 2 days of reserve water. Generator? Carl spoke up. Dual diesel generators. Kicked in automatically when the power grid started flickering about 20 minutes ago. We've got fuel for roughly 72 hours of full operation. If we cut non-essential systems elevators, half the lighting, HVAC to unoccupied floors, I can stretch it to 5 days. Do it. Already started. I looked around the room. Medical supplies? Dr. Elizabeth nodded. We're a fully stocked regional hospital. Medications, surgical supplies, IV fluids, antibiotics, anesthetics. We have significant inventory. More than most places in the city right now. That makes us valuable, I said. Which means if anyone outside figures out we're operational and stocked, we become a target. Not just from the infected, from people. The room absorbed that. I could see the shift in several faces. The realization that the threat matrix wasn't a single variable. It was layered. Infected outside, dwindling resources inside. And somewhere between those two pressures, the unpredictable element of desperate human beings who would want what we had. So we organize, I said. We establish watches. We ration. We prepare for the possibility that no one is coming for us, and everything we need to survive is already inside these walls. Dr. Malik leaned forward. You're talking about turning a hospital into a compound. I'm talking about keeping 300 people alive. The first night inside Meridian General was the longest night of my life, and I've spent nights in places that would make this hospital look like a resort. The difference was information in combat. You have intelligence. You have radio contact with command. You have satellite imagery and tactical briefings, and a chain of support that stretches back to an entire nation's infrastructure. Here, we had a television that stopped broadcasting at 9:14 p.m. when the local affiliate went dark. And we had windows through which we could watch Louisville disintegrate. The fires spread south and west throughout the evening. By midnight, the skyline glowed amber in a way that had nothing to do with city lights. Power had failed across most of the grid, we could tell, because the familiar constellations of streetlights and building windows that should have been visible from the upper floors simply weren't there anymore. Meridian General sat on its own generators like a lit candle in a darkened cathedral. I established 4-hour watch rotations on every floor. 8 positions covering every angle of the building's perimeter. The watchers were volunteers, a mix of staff and visitors. And I paired each one with a radio from the maintenance department's supply. Carl had 14 handheld units, which was barely enough, but better than nothing. The infected had accumulated outside. By nightfall, there were perhaps 40 of them in the parking lot and surrounding grounds. They didn't organize. They didn't strategize. They moved in response to stimuli, sound, light, movement. When someone walked past a window on the first floor, the nearest infected would orient toward it with a speed that was deeply unsettling. But they didn't coordinate assaults. They didn't test the doors systematically. Not yet. I was on the 3rd floor, looking out a darkened window at the parking lot below, when Denise Okoye found me. She'd been with her mother all afternoon. Rose Okoye, 67, recovering from a valve replacement surgery, stable but not mobile. "My mother wants to know if we're going to be okay," Denise said, standing beside me at the window. She didn't look at the things below. She looked at me. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the man downstairs seems to know what he's doing." "That's generous? Is it accurate?" I considered her question honestly. I know how to secure a perimeter and manage resources under threat. I know how to organize people and maintain discipline. What I don't know is what we're dealing with, how it spreads, how long it lasts, whether there's anyone coming. So we're on our own, until evidence says otherwise. Denise was quiet for a moment. Below us, an infected man walked into a parked car, bounced off the hood, and continued walking in a slightly different direction. No pain response, no correction, just momentum redirected. "I'm a logistics coordinator," she said, "for a shipping company. I manage supply chains, distribution routes, inventory systems." She paused. "I'm very good at it." "I believe you." "Then use me." I looked at her. In the dim light from the emergency corridor fixtures, her face held an expression I recognized, not bravery, not denial, but the particular determination of someone who has decided that usefulness is their survival strategy. I'd seen it in soldiers who channeled their fear into competence. It was one of the most powerful psychological tools a person could deploy. "Tomorrow morning, I want a complete inventory of every consumable resource in this building. Food, water, medical supplies, cleaning materials, batteries, linens, fuel, everything. Can you do that?" "Give me 2 people and I'll have it done by noon." "You'll have 3. Talk to Loretta in the morning." Denise nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "My mother's room is 4-West-12. If things get bad, if we need to move, she can't walk yet. She'll need to be carried. I'll make sure someone knows." She left. I stayed at the window and watched the parking lot below, where the infected moved in their aimless, terrible patterns, bumping off cars and each other like atoms in a gas, waiting for a stimulus to give their hunger direction. The radio on my belt crackled. Carl's voice, low and controlled. "Cray, South Loading Dock. You need to see this." I was already moving. The South Loading Dock was a concrete bay designed for delivery trucks, enclosed by a rolling steel door that Carl had dropped during the initial lockdown. It was solid industrial gauge, motor-driven, built to withstand accidental impacts from reversing vehicles. But what Carl wanted me to see wasn't the door itself. It was what was on the other side of it. We could hear them, not the random scrabbling of 1 or 2 infected stumbling against an obstacle. This was layered sound hands and bodies pressed against steel. A continuous pressure that made the door vibrate at a frequency I could feel in my chest. Carl had his flashlight pointed at the base of the door, where a gap of maybe 2 inches allowed air circulation. Through that gap, I could see movement. Fingers. Dozens of fingers scraping along the concrete, reaching under the gap, bending backward against the steel in ways that should have produced screams of pain, but produced nothing. "Started about 20 minutes ago," Carl said. "First it was a few. Then more kept coming. I think the generators are drawing them. The sound, the vibration, maybe even the heat from the exhaust vents." He was right. The generators were in the basement mechanical room, and their exhaust vented through ports on the south wall directly adjacent to the loading dock. We were broadcasting our presence with every revolution of those diesel engines. "Can you reroute the exhaust?" Carl shook his head. "Not without shutting down and reconfiguring the ductwork. That's a 12-hour job minimum, and we'd lose power for most of it." "Can you muffle it?" he thought. I can pack insulation around the external vents, reduce the sound signature. Won't eliminate it, but might cut it enough to reduce the attraction. Do it at first light. Take whoever you need. I pressed my ear against the rolling door. The vibration was steady, almost rhythmic, and I could hear beneath it a sound that wasn't mechanical, a collective exhalation. The breath of dozens of infected, pressing against a barrier they couldn't understand but refused to abandon. There was no strategy in it, just mass. Mass was the strategy. They didn't need to think. They just needed to accumulate. I went back upstairs and found Dr. Malik in the second-floor corridor, checking on patients who had been consolidated from less secure areas of the building. He'd been moving through rooms methodically, adjusting IV drips, checking vitals, performing the rituals of medicine, even as the world outside abandoned them. "How many critical patients?" I asked. 11. 4 post-surgical who need monitoring. 2 cardiac patients requiring medication schedules. 1 child asthmatic, 6 years old. Name is Lily Cho, who depends on nebulizer treatments every 4 hours. The rest are stable enough to move if needed. But those 11 are anchored to their beds by necessity. If we had to evacuate a floor, how fast could you move them? He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. Evacuate to where? Upward. If a ground floor breach happens, I need to know how quickly we can move critical patients up. With enough hands. 20 minutes to move the mobile ones. The 11 criticals would take longer. 40 minutes, maybe more. Some of them are on equipment that needs to be moved with them, or they die. Then we pre-stage. Tomorrow, I want every critical patient mapped with a transport plan. Who carries them? What equipment goes with them? Which route they take? Assigned personnel for each one. Malik nodded slowly. You've done this before. Not this exactly, but evacuation under threat. Forward operating bases. Different threat, same principle. You assume the perimeter will be compromised, and you plan for the retreat before you need it. That's a bleak way to think. Bleak keeps people alive. He returned to his rounds. I stood alone in the corridor, listening to the building. A hospital at night has its own language, the hum of ventilation, the soft beep of monitors, the occasional distant cough or murmur. But layered beneath those familiar sounds was a new one, a low, continuous pressure from the south wall that vibrated through the structure like the building itself was holding its breath. 300 people slept inside those walls, trusting that the steel and glass and concrete would hold. I didn't sleep. I hadn't earned that yet. Dawn came gray and reluctant, filtered through smoke that had settled over the city like a membrane. The skyline was different now. Several buildings that I could identify by their silhouettes from the 4th-floor windows were missing their upper portions, burned or collapsed during the night. No emergency vehicles moved on the roads I could see. No helicopters, no military convoys. The sky was empty of everything except birds, and even the birds seemed confused, circling in patterns that had no destination. Denise started her inventory at 6 a.m. with 3 volunteers. A hospital cook named Miguel Reyes, who knew the kitchen stores intimately. A medical student named Priya Singh, who had been shadow studying in the pharmacy when the lockdown hit. And a visitor named James Whitfield, a retired accountant who told Denise he'd spent 40 years counting things and didn't intend to stop now. By noon, she had a complete picture, and she presented it in the conference room with the precision of someone delivering a quarterly report to shareholders. Food. We have supplies for approximately 300 people for 6 days at 1,500 calories per person per day. That's below normal intake, but sustainable. Water. Municipal is still flowing as of this morning, but I'm recommending we begin filling every available container now in case it stops. Bathtubs, sinks, buckets, sterile basins. If municipal fails, rooftop reserves give us 48 hours. Medical supplies, extensive. Dr. Malik and Priya are cataloging specifics, but the pharmacy alone has enough antibiotics, analgesics, and emergency medications to run a field hospital for 2 weeks. We also have 73 units of stored blood in the blood bank, though that has a limited viability window. She flipped a page in her notebook. Non-obvious resources. The maintenance department has welding equipment, power tools, and approximately 400 pounds of steel stock used for repairs. The kitchen has commercial-grade knives and a walk-in freezer that can serve as a secure cold storage. The laundry facility has industrial chemicals, bleach, ammonia that could serve defensive purposes if needed. The chapel on the second floor has 36 candles and a battery-powered speaker. And the gift shop has 14 disposable lighters, which I've already collected. I looked at her. You inventoried the gift shop? I inventoried everything. It was the first time in 24 hours I felt something that might have been hope. The morning brought another development, one that tested the fragile social structure we were building. A group of 17 people, led by a man named Dale Everett, approached me in the first floor atrium with a demand. Dale was 45, thick-necked, a construction foreman who'd been visiting his wife in the maternity ward. His wife, Carla, had delivered their second child 2 days ago. He was frightened. And frightened men with families often channel their fear into aggression toward whoever appears to be in charge. My wife and baby need to be on the top floor, he said. Away from those things outside. Not down here where the windows are. We're relocating vulnerable patients and families to upper floors this afternoon, I said. It's already in the plan. I want to see the plan. I want to know who decided you're running things. Nobody elected you. He wasn't wrong. Nobody had elected me. Nobody had appointed me. I'd assumed authority through the momentum of competence. And that kind of authority has a shelf life, especially when fear reaches the point where people start questioning whether the person making decisions is making the right ones. You're right, I said. Nobody elected me. Dr. Elizabeth is the administrator of this facility, and she's authorized the security measures we've implemented. I'm advising on those measures based on 30 years of military experience. If you have a better plan for keeping your wife and newborn safe, I want to hear it. Dale's jaw worked. The people behind him shifted. I could feel the room measuring us, measuring the tension between institutional order and personal fear. I just want my family safe, he said, quieter now. So do I, all 300 of us. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his group. The confrontation dissolved. But the residue remained a reminder that the infected outside were only one kind of threat. The pressure inside was building its own terrible mathematics. On the second day, the water stopped. It happened at 11:23 a.m. I know because Miguel was in the kitchen filling stock pots when the faucet coughed, sputtered, and went dry. He radioed me immediately. Carl confirmed it within minutes. Municipal pressure had dropped to 0 across the entire building. Whatever infrastructure fed Louisville's water system had failed. Pumping stations lost to power outages or breaches in the main lines, or simply no one left to operate the systems that a city depends on without ever noticing. Denise's foresight saved us. She'd had people filling containers since dawn of the first day. We had approximately 900 gallons stockpiled in bathtubs, sinks, wheeled laundry bins lined with plastic sheeting, and every sterile basin the hospital possessed. Combined with the rooftop reserves, which held another 2,200 gallons, we had enough water for roughly 5 days, if we imposed strict rationing. I called a meeting of the department heads, a group that now functioned as an informal council. Anand, Loretta, Carl, Malik, Denise, and a new addition, Father Patrick Donnelly, the hospital chaplain, who had been quietly moving through the building offering comfort and had become a critical stabilizing presence among the 300. He was 68, soft-spoken, with hands that trembled slightly from early-stage Parkinson's. And he had an ability to sit with frightened people and make them feel heard in a way that no logistical plan could replicate. Water rationing begins immediately, I said. 2 liters per person per day for drinking. Medical use gets priority allocation. No bathing, no laundry, no non-essential cleaning. Toilets get flushed once per day using gray water we'll collect from hand washing. Loretta raised a concern. Sanitation will deteriorate fast. A hospital runs on cleanliness. If we can't maintain hygiene protocols, we're going to see secondary infections in surgical patients, urinary tract infections from catheters, and wound complications. I know. We use alcohol-based sanitizer for hand hygiene. How much do we have? Enough for 2 weeks if we're careful. Then we're careful. The water crisis forced a psychological shift I hadn't anticipated. Until that moment, the lockdown had felt temporary to most people, an emergency measure that would end when help arrived. The loss of water made it real in a way that sealed doors and distant fires hadn't. Water is fundamental, primal. When it stops flowing, something in the human mind recalibrates, and the timeline of survival extends from days to the undefined. And that undefined space is where despair lives. I saw it in faces that afternoon, the quiet recalculation behind people's eyes. The mother on the 3rd floor who held her sleeping toddler and stared out the window at nothing. The elderly man in a wheelchair who stopped asking the nurses when he could go home. The medical students who had been energetic and helpful and were now sitting in the hallway with their backs against the wall, not speaking. Father Donnelly found me in the stairwell at 4 p.m. I was reviewing the building plans, marking potential points where we might collect rainwater if it rained, calculating roof drainage capacity, when he sat down on the step beside me and said nothing for a full minute. "They're losing hope," he finally said. "I know. You can't manage that with logistics. I know that too. What you're doing, the watches, the rationing, the organization, it's keeping people alive. But keeping people alive and keeping people human are 2 different projects. If they lose the sense that this life is worth preserving, your systems won't matter." I looked at him. His hands were trembling against his knees. He pressed them flat to still them. "What do you suggest, Father?" "Let me organize something tonight. Not a service, not everyone here shares a faith, but a gathering in the atrium. Let people talk. Let people share meals together instead of eating alone in their rooms. Let the children play where adults can see them. Remind people that survival isn't just biology." I hesitated. Gatherings created noise. Noise attracted the infected. But isolation was eroding morale faster than I could reinforce walls. "Keep it to the interior atrium, away from exterior walls, and keep the volume down." He smiled. It was small and tired, but it was real. "I've been doing quiet gatherings for 40 years, Mr. Cray. It's rather my specialty." The gathering that evening changed the interior landscape of Meridian General in ways I couldn't have engineered through any tactical plan. Father Donnelly arranged it in the central atrium, a skylit space in the core of the building, surrounded by interior corridors, insulated from the outside by layers of walls and rooms. Miguel and the kitchen staff prepared a communal meal using rationed ingredients: rice, canned vegetables, and a soup that was mostly water but was hot and shared, and therefore felt like more than it was. People sat on the floor, on chairs dragged from waiting rooms, on blankets spread across the tile. Children moved between groups with the oblivious freedom that young children possess. 3-year-old Marcus Williams Jr. toddled through the crowd distributing crackers from a box he'd found somewhere, offering one to each person he passed with the solemnity of a communion ritual. Lily Cho, the asthmatic 6-year-old, sat in her mother's lap and drew pictures with crayons someone had found in the pediatric unit. She drew a house with a yellow door and a sun that took up half the sky. I stood on the periphery and watched. Loretta was eating beside 2 of her nurses, laughing at something one of them said, genuine laughter, the first I'd heard inside these walls. Dr. Malik sat with Rose Okoye's roommate, an elderly woman named Beatrice, and they were playing cards with a deck missing the 7 of diamonds. Denise sat with her mother's wheelchair pulled close, holding her hand, talking in low tones. Dale Everett held his newborn daughter against his chest and swayed gently, his wife Carla asleep against his shoulder. For 20 minutes, the building was not a fortress. It was a community. Then the radio on my belt broke the moment. "Cray, West Wing, 2nd floor. We've got people outside, living people. They're at the fire exit." I moved fast. The West Wing fire exit on the 2nd floor opened onto an exterior staircase, a metal structure bolted to the building's face, accessible from the parking structure across a narrow alley. Carl had disabled the crash bar and chained the door shut on day 1. I could hear them before I reached the door. Voices, human voices, ragged with exhaustion and fear, calling out, "Please, we can see your lights. Please open the door. We have children with us." I pressed my face to the narrow window beside the door. The exterior staircase held 9 people. 4 adults, 5 children. They were huddled on the landing, and below them, at the base of the stairs, the 4 infected were climbing. Not fast, the stairs seemed to confuse their motor coordination, but climbing nonetheless, hauling themselves upward 1 step at a time with hands that gripped the railings like clamps. Dayon was beside me. He'd been on watch in this section. His eyes were wide. "We have to let them in," he said. "If we open that door and one of those things reaches this landing before we close it, we compromise the entire 2nd floor. There are kids out there, Cray." I looked again. The infected were 8 steps from the landing. The people on the landing were pressed against our door, and a woman was holding an infant wrapped in a jacket. I unchained the door. "Dion, grab the 2 nearest people and get them to hold this door ready to slam the moment everyone's through. Go!" He ran. I pulled the chain free, gripped the crash bar, and pushed. The night air hit me along with the smell of smoke and something organic and wrong. The infected carried a scent like copper and rot. "Inside, now, move." They poured through. The woman with the infant first, a man carrying a child on each hip, 2 teenagers, another man who was limping badly. The last woman through was pulling a boy of maybe 10 by the hand. And as she crossed the threshold, I saw the infected reach the landing, the closest one, a man in a hospital gown from some other facility, lunging forward with arms extended. I slammed the door. The impact of his body against the steel shook the frame. Dayon and the 2 volunteers threw the chain back through the handles. I snapped the padlock shut. The boy was crying. The woman holding him was whispering something I couldn't hear. 9 more people. 309 now. and every one of them had a story about what was happening outside. The survivors from the staircase had come from a neighborhood 6 blocks east. Their stories were fragments, each person holding a different piece of the same shattered mirror. Martin Cross, the limping man, was a high school history teacher who'd barricaded his classroom with 32 students when the infection reached Jefferson County High. Only he and the 2 teenagers, Kayla and Devin, both 16, made it out through a service tunnel beneath the gymnasium. The woman with the infant was Sarah Esteban. She wouldn't say where she'd come from. She held her baby against her chest and rocked mechanically. And when Father Donnelly brought her water, she drank it without looking at him. The 10-year-old boy's name was Omar. He'd been with the last woman through the door, Angela Woodard, a neighbor of his family. She told me, quietly, outside the room where Omar was sleeping, that his parents hadn't made it out of their house. She'd pulled him through a window. I debriefed Martin separately in the conference room, while Loretta's team checked the newcomers for injuries and bites. "How bad is it out there?" He laughed. It was the kind of laugh that has nothing to do with humor. "There's no out there anymore. The city is gone. Not all at once. It's like a tide. The infected move through an area, and whatever's behind them is just empty. Streets full of cars with open doors, houses with lights still on and nobody inside. I saw a dog sitting next to someone on a sidewalk, just waiting. And the person wasn't." He stopped, pressed his palms against his eyes. "Is anyone organizing? Military? Police?" I heard gunfire on the first night. Organized gunfire like a line, like a formation, south of downtown. It lasted about an hour, and then it stopped. After that, nothing. The implications settled into me like cold water. If a military response had been attempted and had lasted only an hour, either the force had been overwhelmed, redeployed, or there hadn't been enough personnel to maintain the line. Any of those options meant that external rescue was not imminent. I shared this assessment with Anand and the council at our morning meeting on day 3. The room was quiet when I finished. Dr. Malik broke the silence. "So we're planning for weeks, not days." "We're planning for as long as it takes." "Our resources don't extend for weeks," Denise said. "Food gives us 4 more days at current rationing. Water 3, maybe 4, if we reduce allocation below what's medically advisable. The generators have fuel for 2 more days. Then we need to acquire more." "From where?" Carl asked. I'd been thinking about this since the water stopped. The hospital was located in a mixed commercial residential area. Within 2 blocks, there was a grocery store, a pharmacy, a gas station, and a restaurant supply warehouse. All of them potentially held resources that could extend our survival timeline significantly. All of them required going outside. "Scavenging runs," I said. "Small teams, coordinated, quick." The room erupted, not in anger, in fear. Anand spoke first, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had absorbed the weight of 300 lives into her posture. "You're proposing we send people into that?" "I'm proposing we send people into that, so the other 300 don't starve." "Who volunteers for something like that?" I go first. Dale Everett, who had positioned himself at the edge of these council meetings, uninvited but not unwelcome, spoke from the doorway. "I'll go." I looked at him. The man who 4 days ago had challenged my authority was now volunteering to walk into a city full of infected beside me. Waste and fear had restructured him. The birth of his daughter had made the stakes personal in a way that demanded action rather than complaint. "You have construction experience," I said. "You're fit. Can you stay quiet under pressure?" I hung steel on high-rises in wind that would knock you off your feet. Quiet and focused is what I do. Then you're on the team. Dayon raised his hand. I know this neighborhood. I grew up 4 blocks from here. I know every alley, every back door, every shortcut. 3 men. 1 mission. Tomorrow at dawn. We went out at 5:17 a.m. on day 4, through a ground-floor window on the east side that faced an alley obscured from the main parking lot by a dumpster enclosure. Carl had loosened the window frame the night before, so it could be removed and replaced from inside. Loretta stationed 2 nurses at the window with radios and instructions. If they saw infected approaching the extraction point, they'd signal us immediately. The morning air tasted different. Louisville had always carried the scent of the Ohio River, of bourbon distilleries, of urban life layered and complex. Now it smelled like ash and biological decay. The smoke had thinned overnight, but a haze clung to everything, softening the edges of buildings and giving the streets a quality like a photograph left in water. We moved in single file. I led, Dale behind me, Dayon at the rear. We each carried a backpack and a melee tool. I had a fire axe from the hospital's emergency station. Dale carried a length of steel pipe, and Dayon had a heavy-duty wrench that could crack a skull if it came to that. I'd briefed them on the rules the night before. No unnecessary sound. No separation beyond arm's reach. If we encountered infected, avoidance was the priority. Engagement only if cornered. And the cardinal rule. If one of us was bitten, the other 2 left immediately. Dale had stared at me when I said that. You'd leave a man behind. I'd leave a man who was already gone. The grocery store was 2 blocks south. We reached it in 12 minutes, moving through alleys and behind parked cars, stopping at every corner to scan. The infected were sparse in this area. Most had migrated toward the denser neighborhoods downtown or accumulated around noise sources. We passed 3 motionless bodies on the street that I assessed quickly. No movement, no breathing. Dead. Truly dead. Not the animated death of the infected. The grocery store's front windows were shattered, and the interior had been partially looted in the initial panic. But the back stockroom was intact, the door was heavy, and whoever had ransacked the front hadn't penetrated it. Dale used the pipe to pry the service entrance, and we slipped inside. The stockroom was a treasure. Cases of canned food beans, vegetables, fruit, soup, flats of bottled water, bags of rice and dried pasta, commercial-sized containers of cooking oil. It wasn't infinite, but it was enough to push our timeline from days to weeks. Fill everything you can carry, I said. Prioritize calories and water. Ignore anything that's heavy but low value. We loaded our packs in disciplined silence. Each bag held approximately 40 pounds when full. We made our first trip back to the hospital in 19 minutes, passed the supplies through the window, and went back for a second load. On the 3rd trip, Dayon made a sound. A small, involuntary intake of breath that stopped Dale and me in our tracks. We were in the alley behind the grocery store, and Dayon was looking through a gap in a wooden fence into the adjacent parking lot. Infected. Not 3 or 4. Dozens. They were standing in the lot in a loose cluster, motionless, faces tilted slightly upwards. Not moving, not chasing, just standing. Their breathing was synchronized, a collective inhalation and exhalation that moved through the group like a wave. They were resting, or whatever the infected equivalent of rest was, a dormant state, conserving whatever metabolic energy drove them, waiting for a stimulus to reactivate the hunt. Don't move, I breathed. Don't breathe loud. We stood frozen for what felt like geological time but was probably 90 seconds. Then, Slowly, I gestured retreat. We backed away from the fence one careful step at a time, circled through a side alley, and returned to the hospital by an alternate route. When we came through the window, Loretta helped pull in our packs and looked at our faces. "How bad?" "We got what we need," I said. "But the neighborhood's not empty. They're out there in numbers we didn't see from the windows. They're gathering, and they're doing something I didn't expect." "What?" "They're still, together, waiting. Almost like they're learning to conserve energy between hunts." The room processed that. If the infected were evolving behaviors, our timeline had just compressed in ways none of us could calculate. The supplies from the grocery store bought us 11 additional days. Denise recalculated our inventory with the new acquisitions and presented an updated timeline. 21 days total if we maintained strict rationing. 21 days of survival sealed inside a building with 309 people, surrounded by an infected population that was, by every observation from our watchers, growing. But the threat that nearly destroyed us didn't come from outside. On day 7, a nurse named Claudia Reeves discovered something during a routine check of the newcomers. One of the teenagers from Martin Cross's group, Devon, 16 years old, quiet, withdrawn since his arrival, had a wound on his left calf that he'd been hiding beneath his jeans. It was a bite mark, swollen, inflamed, and surrounded by the characteristic vascular discoloration that we'd observed in the infected through the windows. Claudia came to me. I went to Anand. Anand brought Malik. We stood outside the room where Devon was sleeping and had the conversation that none of us wanted to have. "How long has he had it?" I asked. "Based on the inflammation, at least 3 days," Malik said. "He was bitten before he reached us. He concealed it." "Can you treat it?" "I don't know what this pathogen is. I can administer broad-spectrum antibiotics, antivirals, try to manage the infection locally. But if this is what turned the people outside into what they are, I have no protocol, no literature, no framework. What's the alternative?" Silence. Because the alternative was the thing none of us could say in that sterile corridor with its fluorescent lighting and its smell of antiseptic and its illusion of civilization. Anand said it. "We isolate him, completely. A sealed room with observation. If he turns, we—" She stopped, drew a breath. "We contain the situation." "He's 16, Malik said. "I know how old he is." I went into the room alone. Devon was awake. He knew why I was there. I could see it in his eyes, which held the particular terror of someone who's been carrying a secret that was always going to surface. He was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, and he'd rolled up his jeans. And the wound was exposed, ugly, inflamed, ringed with blackened vessels that climbed his calf like dark vines. "When were you bitten?" I asked. "At the school, when we were running. One of them grabbed my leg through a door. I kicked free, but—" His voice cracked. I thought if I didn't say anything, maybe it would be different for me. Maybe I'd be okay. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. The distance between us was 3 feet and an uncrossable moral chasm. "Are you going to kill me?" he asked. "No." "Are you going to throw me out?" "No." "Then what?" "We're going to move you to a room where we can monitor you. Dr. Malik is going to treat the wound with everything he has, and we're going to watch and hope." "And if I turn?" I held his eyes. He deserved honesty. 16 years old, bitten, terrified, and alone in a building full of strangers who had every rational reason to view him as a threat to their survival. He deserved the truth. "Then we'll make sure you don't hurt anyone, including yourself." Devin was moved to a storage room on the 4th floor that had a solid door with an exterior lock. Malik cleaned and dressed the wound, administered antibiotics and an antiviral cocktail that he admitted was a guess, and set up a monitoring schedule. Kayla, the other teenager from Jefferson County High, sat outside his door for 6 hours straight, refusing to leave until Loretta convinced her to eat. The hospital learned about Devin by the end of the day. There was no containing it. 309 people in a closed space generate information the way a reactor generates heat constantly, inevitably, and with the potential for meltdown. Dale found me that night. His face was hard. That kid's a bomb, you know that. He's a 16-year-old boy. He's a 16-year-old boy with a bite that might turn him into one of those things. And you put him 1 floor above my wife and baby. He left before I could respond. But he wasn't wrong. He just wasn't right either. Devin's fever began on day 8 and climbed through day 9 with a velocity that had Malik checking his monitors every 30 minutes. 101, 103, 105. The boy sweated through his sheets, through the mattress pad, through the plastic-wrapped pillow. His pulse raced and then slowed to a rhythm that Malik described as concerning and irregular. The vascular discoloration had spread from his calf to his thigh, a dark network of inflamed vessels visible beneath skin that was growing paler by the hour. Kayla maintained her vigil outside the door. She told me she and Devin had been in the same AP history class, that he'd helped her study for the exam last semester, that he was funny in a quiet way, the kind of person who made jokes under his breath that only the person sitting next to him could hear. She told me this, as if establishing his humanity could alter the biology consuming him from the wound upward. On day 10, the fever broke. Malik called me at 3 a.m. His voice on the radio was strange, not alarmed, not relieved, but bewildered. His temperature's dropping. 101, 99.8, 99 flat. The vascular marks are receding. I went to the 4th floor. Devin was awake, pale and drained, with a hollowed-out look of someone who had passed through the interior of something terrible and emerged on the other side as something fragile and new. He looked at me from the bed with eyes that were clear, pupils normal, no dilation, no vascular surge beneath his skin. "I'm hungry," he said. Malik ran every test the hospital's laboratory equipment could perform. White blood cell count elevated, but returning to normal. No abnormal protein markers in the blood panels available to us. Heart rhythm stabilized. The bite wound itself was still inflamed, but no longer spreading. The dark vessels had retreated, leaving behind bruised tissue that was healing rather than deteriorating. "I don't understand it," Malik told me and Anand in the conference room. "Either the pathogen didn't take hold fully, or his immune system fought it off, or there's a variable we can't see. But he's not turning. His vitals are normalizing." "Could he still be a carrier?" Anand asked. "I have no way to know. We keep him isolated for another week and monitor. But what I'm seeing right now, this boy's body rejected whatever this is." The news spread through the hospital the way all news did, fast, distorted, and charged with the particular energy that human beings generate when impossible things happen. Some people took it as evidence of a hope proof that the infection wasn't a death sentence, that the human body could resist. Others were skeptical, frightened, convinced that Devin was a delayed threat and that his recovery was temporary. Dale was in the second camp. He cornered me in the stairwell on day 11, with 4 other men behind him, visitors and staff who shared his anxiety. "You're gambling with our lives," he said. "Every day that kid is in this building is a day we're playing odds you can't calculate. Dr. Malik is monitoring him continuously. His vitals are normal. Normal doesn't mean safe. Nothing means safe, Dale. Nothing in this building, nothing outside it. Safe isn't available anymore. What's available is managed risk, and that's what we're doing. You're not God, Cray. You don't get to decide who's an acceptable risk for my daughter. I looked at the men behind him. Their faces held the compressed tension of people who had been frightened for too long and needed a release valve. Dale was becoming that valve channeling collective fear into confrontation. And if I wasn't careful, confrontation would become fracture. And fracture in a sealed building was more dangerous than anything outside. Dale, you helped carry supplies through hostile territory. You volunteered when nobody else would. That matters. You're not a coward, and I'm not treating you like one. But right now, the most dangerous thing inside this hospital isn't a 16-year-old boy with a healing bite. It's a group of scared men standing in a stairwell, deciding to override the medical judgment of a trained physician because fear feels more compelling than evidence. He held my gaze for 10 endless seconds. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. His men followed. The stairwell echoed with their footsteps, and then there was silence. And I leaned against the wall and felt the weight of every decision I'd made settled deeper into my bones. They came on day 19. Not rescue, not the way we'd imagined it. No helicopters descending like salvation from a clear sky. A convoy of National Guard vehicles appeared on the road south of the hospital at dawn, grinding through abandoned cars, their mounted speakers broadcasting an evacuation order for any survivors in the area. We signaled them from the roof with mirror flashes and a bedsheet banner that Carl's team had painted with the word "Alive" in letters 6 feet tall. The soldiers who entered Meridian General found 309 people. Organized, fed, hydrated, medically stable. They found watch rotations still functioning, rationing systems still enforced. A 16-year-old boy whose blood would later be studied in laboratories I'll never see. They found a retired school principal who had organized a classroom for the children on the 3rd floor. A logistics coordinator who could account for every calorie and milliliter of water consumed over 19 days. A chaplain whose trembling hands had held more frightened people than anyone could count. A cardiologist who had treated every patient with the same rigor he'd have applied in a world that still made sense. They found a building that had held. The sergeant leading the convoy asked me how we'd survived. I told him the truth, it wasn't me. It was Anand making the call to trust a stranger. Loretta organizing chaos into order. Carl keeping the machines alive. Denise counting what mattered. Donnelly holding the human center when the structure wasn't enough. I'm not a hero. I'm just the man who locked the doors in time.